Ashley Bryan is an African-American author and illustrator who was born in Harlem, New York in 1923. He lived in an apartment with his family along with his 5 siblings and 3 cousins, and his parents were actually descendants of West African slaves from Antigua. At 17, he was accepted into a tuition-free art school, but was drafted into the U.S. Army at 19. And after Army, he went on to finish his schooling there and went to college. And then he went on to teach at several schools and universities before retiring. And he is the winner of the Coretta Scott King Award, the Virginia Hamilton Lifetime Achievement Award, Laura Ingalls Wilder Medal, and the New York Public Library's Literary Lions Award. Ashley Bryan is Ashley Bryan felt really passionate about introducing African American spirituals and the oral traditions in children's literature since it hadn't really been done before. So he wanted to create books that incorporated the culture with beautiful illustrations that could be presented and shared with others. And most of his genres included nonfiction, folklore, poetry, fiction, folk tales, fairy tales, biography, autobiographies, historical fiction, myths and legends, and more. So he covered a wide variety of genres, but his main purpose was to bring enlightenment about the African American culture. Ashley Bryan has his own website, and on his website he states that his first publication was made in kindergarten, and it was an alphabet book in 1928, and pictured here are some illustrations he included from it. However, I was not able to find the actual book. We weren't able to find it anywhere online, but it is stated in his website as his first publication, so we wanted to give him credit where it was due. Ashley So Black Boy was illustrated by Ashley Bryan. It was written by Richard Wright. It's an autobiography about Richard Wright's experience as an African American in the South. And Ashley Bryan actually did the drawings during his last semester at Cooper Union after he returned from World War II. And it's a very obscure edition that can only be purchased through rare bookstores and sites. And the next one he worked on was Fablio, which is an old French tales. And this was republished multiple times, so in 1965, 1966, and 1976. And these fables were written in the 13th and 14th century France. And so this was actually Ashley Bryan's first book published that he did in linoleum, I think that's how, linoleum maybe, block illustrations. So that's kind of how he did his illustrations for that. So, like mentioned before, Ashley Bryan likes to use linoleum block print. And basically what this is just taking a thick, soft cork linoleum, and it's like usually mounted on a block of wood. And carved in relief with like a design pattern and used in making prints. And so he continued to do this for Moon for What Do You Wait? And Moon for What Do You Wait, he was the illustrator, and what they did was take a collection of poems by a Bengali poet named Tagore, and he illustrated some linoleum block prints to go with it, and it was published in 1967. And then his next work, he actually wrote himself, so he was the author and illustrator of The Adventures of Aku, which was published in 1976. And it's basically a story within a story, and it's an American tale about how cat and dog once were friends, but in the end, dog ends up sleeping and eating on the ground while his enemy cat lies on the best mat in the house and eats from a lovely dish. So it's kind of an African American tale about how cat and dog's relationship came to be now. And in this book, he used black and white illustrations and 2-color plus black tempera illustrations. And so he really wanted to pull out like the African clay dyes and textile designs to make it accurate to the African American culture. The next book that Ashley Bryan came out with was called The Dancing Granny in 1977. And basically, it was retelling an Afro-Caribbean tale. And in this book, you see the trickster spider Annette and the dancing granny gathering and spinning kind of across the pages. And the spider tricks the granny out of her vegetables, but the granny tricks the spider into doing a dance. And Ashley Bryan also inserted the granny as a memory of his grandmother who loved to dance. And he kind of just illustrated it as well and just kind of made it like swirling drawings to kind of match with the story. And he came out with that in 1977. And then he came out with I Greet the Dawn, which were poems by Paul Laurence Dunbar, who was a black poet from 1872 to 1906. And he wanted to come out with this book to draw attention to Dunbar because it was a challenge to be a black poet at the turn of the century, and there was a lot of obstacles that Dunbar encountered as he tried to be a poet during that time. And so Ashley Bryan thought important to bring out his works in this book with illustrations that he added with it. And he published that in 1978. This next book is called Jim Flying High, and he was the illustrator, and Marie Evans was the author, and they published this in 1979. Jim is a fish who accidentally lands in a tree and nearly dries up, and the chief of water has to save him. And it's supposed to be a humorous story, and it's told in poetic prose. And Ashley Bryan made sure to make it colorful and cheerful, so that way it could be geared more towards children. But it also has the lesson of reminding children that it's okay to seek help and reminding adults to help young people find their way out of things. And so they came up with this book and brought it out in 1979. And the next one is Jethro and the Jumbee. Again, he was the illustrator, and then Susan Cooper was the author, and they came out with this in 1979. And Ashley Bryan illustrated this based off of the images from visits to Antigua, which were where his ancestors were from, as mentioned previously in the PowerPoint. And Susan Cooper wrote the story in the dialect of the British Virgin Islands. And so basically in this story, Jethro's angry at his older brother for not keeping his promise to take him fishing on his 8th birthday. And so Jethro meets a shape-shifting Jumbee spirit who helps him change his brother's mind. So again, bringing in that African American culture and folklore. So this next set of books is all based on different cultures' folklore and folk tales. The first one you see pictured is The Cat's Purr, and Ashley Bryan was the author and illustrator. It's a West Indian story, and he has line drawing illustrations, and it's basically just the explanation of why cat and rat are now enemies. And then the next one, Lion and the Ostrich Chicks, and other African folk poems that came out in 1986. He was the author and illustrator, and basically he collected 4 tales from different regions of Africa, and they're all teaching universal lessons about life, overcoming obstacles and different fears. And 3 of the stories are animal trickster tales, and then the 4th one is just a warning against using superhuman forces. And Ashley Bryan incorporated black and white, 2-color plus black tempera illustrations to again make it really obvious with the reds of African clay dyes and the African textile designs to draw into the culture. And this was published in 1986. And then Beats the Story Drum Pum Pum is retelling of 5 Nigerian tales. He was, again, the author and illustrator of this book, and he did use the same type of illustrations with the black and white 2-color plus black tempera illustrations. And basically in this story, you see a lot of animals that are a lot like humans, so it's a lot of personification, and also just applying different characteristics of humans to animals. And it's just a lot of folk tales and humor in those. And then we see What a Morning, The Christmas Story in Black Spirituals by John Langstaff in 1987. So Ashley Bryan was the illustrator. And basically these are all 5 spirituals, and they're kind of arranged for singing, guitar, and piano. And Ashley Bryan incorporates bright illustrations to retell the nativity story in chronological order, and he really tries to tie in African American themes, and he does images of a Black Holy Family and multiracial wise men and shepherds. And so he really also wanted to incorporate colors and illustrations that evoked feelings of joy and peace that go along with the nativity story. And the last one is called Shoko and His 8 Wicked Brothers, and it was illustrated by Fumio Yoshimura in 1988. They published this, and so Ashley Bryan was the illustrator, but it was based off of a traditional Japanese folk tale. And Ashley Bryan really encouraged his friend, because they were friends, to retell the story, and he wanted his friend to illustrate the story in Japanese ink wash. And so basically it's just a Japanese folk tale, and Ashley Bryan does a rendition of it to teach that good character will always prevail. The next book that Ashley Bryan came out with was Turtle Knows Your Name, and it is based on a West Indian folk tale. So he retold the folk tale about a little boy and his grandmother who learn to honor their identities and celebrate their self-worth. And he was also the illustrator, and so he illustrated this to bring lots of color and joy, and he used tempera painting illustrations. And in the book, he used repeating rhymes that are really fun and catchy and rhythmic for children to learn. And this was published in 1989. And then the next one is called Climbing Jacob's Ladder. So he was the illustrator, and he collaborated with John Langstaff to create this book. And this book is basically a book of African American spirituals based on the Bible, so based on biblical heroes and prophets of the Old Testament. And then they also have inserted like brief biological stories based on their lives. And Ashley Bryan again included tempera paintings in this book, and it was published in 1991. This next book is called The Christmas Gift, and it's a collection of poems, songs, and stories, spirituals, recipes, etc., that mark the African American culture, and she gathered it through word of mouth and made it into a book. And Ashley Bryan helped illustrate the newer edition by using like multiple linoleum block print illustrations to go along with it, and they published that in 1993. And the next one is called Ashley Bryan's African Tales, which came out in 1998, and he was the author and illustrator. And it's basically just a collection of 14 of his favorite tales, which had already been published before, but he just wanted to bring the oral traditions from Africa like back to life. And so he just really did a lot of African-inspired colors, like we mentioned before, the black and white and red in his illustrations to tie in the culture. And then the next one is called Sing to the Sun, and he was the author and illustrator of that. And I'm sorry, that actually came out right a couple years before the Ashley Bryan's African Tale, so it came out in 1993. And it's just a collection of art and poetry to celebrate like all different parts of life, to make their kind of, it's just kind of like joyful poems for people to read out loud. And his imagery was again very colorful and bright, and reminiscent to the African American culture. This next book is called The Story of Lightning and Thunder, and Ashley Bryan was again the author and illustrator, published in 1993. And he just basically retold a West African folk tale which teaches how lightning and thunder, which are a mother and son, came to live in the sky. And so he did a lot of poetry and color, and did a lot of color in his illustrations. And then What a Wonderful World was written by George David Weiss and Bob Thiel, but it was illustrated by Ashley Bryan, and they published that in 1995. And basically, the book is about puppet show, and it's kind of supposed to bring out all the different cultural backgrounds, and it has a lot of hope and love in its lyrics. And Ashley Bryan kind of brought the song alive through his tempera painted images of children, and he made sure the children were of all various backgrounds to match what the story was talking about. And it was just supposed to be a puppet show full of wonder, hence the name. This next book is again a collection of African folk tales, and it was written and illustrated by Ashley Bryan and published in 1993. And they are 5 African tales that he discovered through his studies in his research, and he never knew about these African stories before. And it was basically oral tradition, and so it was hard to have a written copy of it, so he wanted to make sure that he put them in written copy and full of rhythm and like poetic verses. And so it contains various different folk tales, and in his illustrations he again did the black and white and then the 2 color plus black tempera and the different reds to mimic the clay dyes, and then the textile designs with the African culture. So that was a common theme in a lot of his books with his illustrations. And the next story is The Story of the 3 Kingdoms by Walter Dean Myers. So he was the illustrator, and this came out in 1997, and it's actually going to be re-released soon by Scholastic. And this is an original fable, so Walter Dean Myers came up with this fable about the world being divided into 3 kingdoms, ruled by different animals, the elephant, the shark, and the hawk. And Ashley Bryan made sure to incorporate like dramatic colors to kind of complement the rhythm in Myers' story. And so the colors are supposed to kind of match what Myers is talking about. And the next one is called The Sun is So Quiet, and this is by Nikki Giovanni. Ashley Bryan was the illustrator, and basically Nikki Giovanni wanted to make a book that made children smile, and kind of brought up different childhood memories such as snuggling under the covers, or describing like riding on rainbows for like childhood dreams. And it was just designed to make you smile. And so Ashley Bryan in his illustration made his colors very warm, and he wanted every page to look like the sun, like a bright beaming smile is basically what he said. And I think he accomplished that even if you just look at the cover. These next 3 books, Ashley Bryan was only the illustrator for. He was not the author. The first one is The House with No Door, which came out in 1998, and this is basically a collection of African riddle poems. And Brian Swan wrote this, and he collected riddle poems from around the world. So all of these have African origin, and Ashley Bryan wanted to create the illustrations with like colorful paintings, and kind of hinting to the idea of mystery because the riddles are mysterious to children. So that's kind of what he wanted to accomplish in his illustrations there. And then the next one is The Carol of the Brown King. And these are nativity poems that Langston Hughes had gathered and written about Christmas. And Ashley Bryan incorporated the tempera illustrations again, but he wanted it to be really bright and colorful and bold to kind of evoke the joy that Christmas brings. And Why Leopard Has Spots, which came out in 1999, are a collection of traditional tales from Liberia. And he worked with Juan Lyde Pay from the Dan ethnic group. And so she grew up in a family whose traditional role was storytelling performance. And so these are like really rich, dramatic, delightful tales that are included in this book. And Ashley, again, he used linoleum prints for his illustrations in this book. The next book we're going to look at is Jump Back Honey, and again these are poems of Paul Laurence Dunbar, and Ashley Bryan was actually the co-illustrator, and he was the editor and co-author of the introduction. And basically what this is it's just a celebration of Paul Dunbar, and they all basically did different illustrations to go along with his poems, and they each wrote a tribute to Dunbar's poetry and how it influenced the African American culture and contributed to just the further enlightenment of the African American culture. The next one is Anessa Lee and the Weaver's Gift. Ashley Bryan was the illustrator, and he wrote with Nikki Grimes. She was the author. They published this in 1999. And basically, this is a collection of 13 poems, and she does it in a unique way where the poems are kind of woven together through the metaphor of Anessa, the main character's loom. And so she's weaving, and it basically just enlightens about a multiracial heritage, family, culture, like her place in the world. And Ashley incorporated the tempera illustrations again to show color and emotion. And then The Night Has Ears is he was the author and illustrator of this book, and basically it's African proverbs, and Ashley Bryan's mother would recite proverbs to him and apply it to any situation that he had. And so Ashley loved the African proverbs, and he wanted to incorporate them in this book, and so he shared 26 proverbs and he illustrated them as well. And he again incorporated the tempera painted illustrations, but they were more interpretive in this book, so you have to think a little whenever you are looking at the illustrations that go along with the African proverbs. And the last one on this page is called Salting the Ocean, and again he was the illustrator. Naomi Nye was the author, and she basically just collected a bunch of student poetry because she gave a lot of workshops over her lifetime, and it was to students of all ages. So these are all poems from students of different ages, and each section Ashley Bryan does illustrations, and he incorporates like vibrant colors. And so yeah, that's basically what this book is about, called Salting the Ocean.
Beautiful Blackbird was published in 2003 by author and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book was cut paper collages, and it won the 2004 Coretta Scott King Illustrator Award. This story is a retelling of a traditional Zambia tale basically about a blackbird who is different from all the other colorful birds. The colorful birds think that the fact that the blackbird is black is amazing and beautiful, and they all want to be painted black to look like him. The moral is that no matter what diversities individuals bring to the table, those are things to be proud of and embrace. The book shows what a supportive community looks like, as well as how people should treat others. All Night, All Day, a child's first book of African American spirituals, was originally published in 1991, and the newest edition was published in 2004 by author and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book was tempera paint illustrations that resemble stained glass panels, as well as musical notation accompanied by piano and guitar notes. This book won the 1992 Coretta Scott King honor. The songbook includes 20 different African American spirituals. The whole images illustrations are commonly spread over 2 pages in this book, where Bryan uses geometric shapes and lines that appear almost fluid. Bryan typically uses bright colors, which is definitely a characteristic of the illustrations in this book. Let It Shine was published in 2007 by author and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book was cut paper and cutout images. This book won the 2008 Coretta Scott King Award. The book is about 3 notorious African American spirituals: When the Saints Go Marching In, This Little Light of Mine, and He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. The images in this book portray the warm and inspirational feelings that these spirituals give children, Bryan using bright colors and incorporating culture into his illustrations. My America was published in 2007 by author and co-illustrator Jan Spivey Gilchrist with co-illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book was watercolor. This poetry book talks about diversity in America, not just between people, but animals and land as well. Ashley Bryan and Gilchrist do a great job of portraying a childlike perspective on what diversity is, as well as use illustrations to go along with that perspective. Bryan's common theme of using bright colors and joyful images is definitely seen in this book. Words to My Life Song was published in 2009 by author and illustrator Ashley Bryan with photographs by Bill McGinnis. This book is an autobiography of Ashley Bryan. It talks about how he grew up during the Great Depression and found refuge in painting and creating art. He also gives his accounts of personal segregation he went through with the stereotypes of being an African American. He tells his story in the most creative way as possible, using his illustrations and photographs from Bill McGinnis as a visual aid to give readers an idea about his life. All Things Bright and Beautiful was published in 2010 by author Cecile F. Alexander and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book are illustrations rendered with Canton construction paper, and they portray movement, for example, the flow of water when talking about ocean creatures. This book is about how beautiful everything God made is. From people to animals to flowers to even just colors, Ashley Bryan portrays the beauty of each thing he writes about as it is a blessing from God. I'm Going to Sing is actually part of a 2-volume songbook, which I will talk about on the next slide. The books I'm Going to Sing and Walk Together Children are books intended for children to follow along on the recorder to learn these African American spiritual songs. So these 2 books are songbooks. Walk Together Children, which is volume 1 in the series, was originally published in 1974. And I'm Going to Sing, which is volume 2, was published in 1982. Walk Together Children received the Coretta Scott King honors in 1983, but both volumes were republished in 2012. The original volumes included hand-cut linoleum block prints done by Ashley Bryan, and the updated ones in 2012 are remakes of those same illustrations but include color. Who Built the Stable was published in 2012 by author and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book was rendered tempera and acrylic paint. Bryan layers colors and images on top of each other. This story is a colored nativity poem. The story is about a boy who helps his carpenter father build a stable, which eventually ends up being the stable that baby Jesus is born in. The story includes a dark-skinned Jesus, which embraces the world's ethnically diverse society. Bryan's illustrations portray kindness and the beauty of this great story. Can't Scare Me was published in 2013 by author and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book was tempera and watercolor paint. The book is about a fearless boy and his grandmother. The book includes rhyming text and song lyrics. The main idea of this book is that the boy lacks any fear even when his grandmother tells him stories about giants that live nearby. The boy instead seeks them out and uses his flute to make friends with the giants. The illustrations are very colorful, following the theme of Ashley Bryan's illustrations using bright colors. Ashley Bryan's Puppets was published in 2014 by author and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book were illustrations along with photographs of the actual puppets created by Ashley Bryan. This book is about how when Ashley Bryan was little, he used to find all sorts of objects that he would transform into puppets, which then in turn he could use to tell a story with. This book uses 2-page spreads to showcase the different puppets, which are typically designed to resemble African gods or goddesses, or just words used in that culture. By Trolley Past Thimbleton Bridge was published in 2015 by author Ashley Bryan and illustrator Marvin Bielik. The media used in this book is intense drawings with faint pencil. This book is about a magical trolley ride that seems to take place inside the mind of a child. There is a circus depicted as well as multiple toys and bright colors that make this book appealing to any kid. The book is in the style of a poem. Sail Away was published in 2015 by author Langston Hughes and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book is multi-tone illustrations. This book is about exploration of the ocean. It is a poetry book that includes African American characters who encounter different creatures and elements at sea. Freedom Over Me was published in 2016 by author and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book was paintings, collages, as well as original slave auction and plantation estate documents. While the storyline of this book is fiction, Bryan gives readers a look into what it was like to be a slave, and the illustrations portray those feelings as well. This is an extremely powerful book that shows the pain and unjust treatment of African Americans during the time where slavery existed in the U.S. It is a poetry-style book accompanied with pen, ink, and watercolor illustrations that bring the characters to life. I Am Loved was published in 2018 by author Nikki Giovanni and illustrator Ashley Bryan. The media used in this book was bright, colorful paintings. This book embodies the importance of feeling loved as a child. It includes poems of faith and family accompanied by abstract paintings that go along with the text.
This book actually just came out in April of 2019, this year. It's called Blooming Beneath the Sun, and this is a compilation of different nursery rhymes written by Christina Rossetti, and Ashley Bryan put illustrations to them. And basically it's just bright collage art with Rossetti's nursery rhymes to create like a very vibrant book for kids and even adults. This next book is Ashley Bryan's newest publication, so it's about to come out on October 15th, 2019. And basically, it's called Infinite Hope, A Black Artist's Journey from World War II to Peace. He's the author and illustrator, and it is a memoir based on his life. And whenever he was in the segregated army during World War II, and how he loved art, and that kind of sustained him through. And basically, in this, you see never before seen artwork and handwritten letters and diary entries from Ashley Bryan throughout his time during this time of his life. And so this is due to come out October 15th.